All right. Welcome to another narration of mine. I bought a real witch book from the deep web. The package didn't arrive by mail. There was no tracking number, no brown cardboard box, and no knock at the door. I simply woke up at 3:13 a.m. to find a heavy, cold object sitting on my chest. It felt like a block of ice wrapped in wet leather. I am, or was, an antiquarian. I dealt in rare books, the kind that smell like history and dead skin. I'd spent months on the darker corners of the decentralized web, searching for the Liber Umbrarum Cordis, the Book of Heart Shadows. Legend called it a real witch book, supposedly written by a woman in 1642 while she was being pressed to death by stones. I thought it was a myth. I thought it was a collector's trophy. I didn't realize it was a predatory organism. The first night. When I clicked on my bedside lamp, the light felt thin. It didn't push back the shadows. It just made them look deeper. The book was bound in a material that was too pale and too porous to be calfskin. It was closed with a silver latch shaped like a human rib. As I touched the latch, a sharp, stinging pain shot through my thumb. I looked down and saw a drop of blood pearl on the silver. The rib didn't just unlatch. It retracted into the cover, pulling my blood into the leather. I opened it. The pages weren't paper or parchment. They felt like dried lungs, brittle, translucent, and veined with faint, purple lines. There were no ink marks. Instead, the words were branded into the surface, as if the book had been burned from the inside out. I made the mistake of reading the first line aloud. The silence is the debt. The space is the payment. As the words left my lips, the room went dead. It wasn't that the sound stopped. It was that the concept of sound vanished. My own voice felt like it was being sucked back down my throat. I tapped the nightstand. Nothing. I shouted. Nothing. The loss of sound. I clapped my hands next to my ears until they stung. But the world was a silent movie. A terrifying, high-pitched pressure began to build inside my skull, like a tea kettle screaming in a room I couldn't enter. I ran to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. My ears weren't bleeding. They looked normal. But when I leaned in close, I saw something moving behind my eardrum. Something thin, black, and spindly was weaving a web across the canal. It looked like a spider made of sewing thread. I tried to scream again, but a sudden, violent cramp in my stomach sent me to my knees. The house groaned. I didn't hear it, but I felt it in the soles of my feet. The floorboards shifted. The walls seemed to tilt inward by a fraction of a degree. The house begins to change. I crawled back to the bedroom, but the hallway was longer than it should have been. My two-bedroom cottage felt like it was stretching, the ceiling rising into a dark, cavernous void. Every time I blinked, a piece of furniture was gone. First my bookshelf, then my desk, then the rug. It wasn't that they were being moved. They were being digested. The book remained on the bed, glowing with a faint, sickly bioluminescence. The purple veins in the pages were pulsing now, synced with the frantic rhythm of my own heart. I realized then that the curse wasn't just on me. It was on the environment I inhabited. I looked out the window. The street lights were gone. The neighbor's house was gone. There was only a thick, impenetrable gray fog that pressed against the glass like wet wool. I tried to open the front door, but the handle was hot, blistering hot. I was trapped in a silent, expanding tomb that was eating my life's work and my senses piece by piece. I'm currently sitting in the middle of an empty living room. The walls are now the color of bruised meat, and I can't even hear my own breathing. The book is open to the second page, and the words are starting to change to my own name. The walls of my home were no longer plaster and lath. As I sat in the center of the living room, the wallpaper began to peel back in long, wet strips, revealing a pulsing, fibrous layer underneath that looked like raw muscle. The house wasn't just collapsing. It was transforming into something biological. I reached out to touch the wall, and the surface was warm. It rippled under my fingertips, a slow, peristaltic wave that made me recoil in horror. I realized with a jolt of pure panic that the Liber Umbrarum Cordis didn't just want my hearing. It was using the physical space of my home to build a body. The auditory ghost. The silence was no longer empty. Even though my ears were functionally dead, blocked by that black, spindly growth I'd seen in the mirror, I started to feel vibrations that my brain interpreted as sound. It wasn't hearing. It was a psychic intrusion. It was a voice that sounded like grinding stones. The foundation is laid in bone. The vibration hummed through my teeth. The windows are made of sight. I looked toward the front bay window. The glass was thickening, turning yellow and opaque. It began to curve outward, forming a perfect, glistening lens. My house was growing an eye, a massive, house-sized eye that stared out into the gray void, looking for whatever had sent the book in the first place. The physical toll. My body was beginning to fail. Without sound, my balance was completely gone. The fluid in my inner ear felt like it had been replaced with molten lead. Every time I tried to stand, the room spun violently, and I would vomit a thick, black bile that smelled like copper and old earth. I crawled toward the kitchen, hoping to find water, but the sink was gone. In its place was a vertical slit in the wall that dripped a clear, viscous fluid. I was so thirsty, I considered licking it, until I saw a small, silver object caught in the slime. It was my wedding ring. The house hadn't just digested my furniture. It was breaking down the very metal and stone into nutrients. My memories, my physical history, everything I owned was being converted into this fleshy, breathing nightmare. The second page. I looked back at the book. It had crawled across the floor on tiny, translucent cilia that had grown from the spine. It was now resting against my thigh. The second page was fully formed. Instead of text, there was a detailed anatomical drawing of a human ear. But the ear had been dissected, its parts rearranged into a map. At the center of the map, where the cochlea should be, was a tiny, real-life hole in the page. A faint, sickly sweet smell started wafting from the hole. I leaned in, unable to stop myself, and saw something glistening inside the paper. It was a tooth, a small human molar embedded in the lung skin of the book. Suddenly, the house let out a violent tremor. The floorboards beneath me split open, not like wood breaking, but like a mouth yawning. I saw the basement, or what used to be the basement. It was a pit of red, churning darkness, filled with the things the house had rejected. I saw the mangled remains of my refrigerator, my clothes, and something else. A hand. A pale, human hand reached up from the pit and gripped the edge of the floor. It wasn't a monster. It was me, a version of me that looked like it had been flayed, its skin used to patch a hole in the hallway ceiling. I am currently trapped on a small island of floorboards in the middle of a house that is now a living, breathing throat. The book is vibrating against my leg, and the tooth in the page is starting to chatter. The eye in the front window just blinked. It saw something in the fog, and it's terrified. The island of wood I was clinging to began to tilt. The floor wasn't just split anymore. It was curving upward like a massive, ribbed tongue. I scrambled toward the only solid thing left, the book. As I grabbed it, the cover felt feverish, the leather sweating a salty, translucent grease that made it nearly impossible to hold. I looked up, and the ceiling was gone. In its place was a vaulted canopy of translucent skin, stretched tight over rafters that had turned into calcified white bone. I could see the gray fog outside through the fleshy roof. But the fog was no longer empty. Huge, spindly silhouettes were moving out there, shapes that looked like elongated human rib cages walking on dozens of needle-like fingers. They were circling my house, tapping on the exterior flesh, with a sound I couldn't hear. but felt as jarring, bone-deep vibrations. The sensory replacement. Since my hearing was gone, the liber umbrarum cordis began to offer a substitute. A new sensation started to bloom at the back of my throat, a taste that carried information. It was bitter, like chewing on an aspirin, and it brought images of the house's thoughts. I tasted the house's hunger. It didn't just want my possessions. It wanted my architecture. I felt a sharp, tearing sensation in my own ribs, and when I looked down at my chest, my skin had become as thin as the book's pages. I could see my own lungs laboring beneath the surface, but they weren't pink anymore. They were turning the same bruised purple as the veins in the book. The house was breathing through me. We were being stitched together by invisible threads of intent. The third page. The book flipped itself over in my hands, the pages flapping like the wings of a dying bird. The third page didn't have drawings or text. It was a mirror, but it didn't reflect the room. It reflected the inside of my head. I saw my brain, but it was covered in that same black, spindly webbing that had taken my hearing. The webbing was pulse-syncing with the house. I realized the curse wasn't a spell. It was a biological takeover. The deep web seller hadn't sent me a book. They had sent me a blueprint for a new kind of predator. And I was the raw material. Suddenly, the eye in the bay window let out a gout of thick, milky fluid. It had spotted one of the things in the fog, trying to enter. The front door, which was now a vertical slit of muscle, clamped shut so hard that the teeth of the door frame crushed into one another, spraying shards of enamel across the floor. The basement presence. The hand I had seen earlier, the flayed version of myself, began to pull the rest of its body out of the pit. It wasn't a separate entity. It was a discarded prototype. Its face was a smooth, featureless mask of scar tissue, except for a single, oversized ear growing where the mouth should be. It lunged at me, not to kill me, but to merge. As its fingers touched my skin, they didn't feel like flesh. They felt like wet Velcro. Our skin began to fuse instantly. I felt my memories of my childhood, my first home, and my parents being sucked out of my mind and into this faceless double. I was becoming the waste, while the house became the real she. I managed to kick the thing back into the pit, but as it fell, it took a piece of my thigh with it. Not bitten off, but simply unzipped from my body. I didn't bleed. Instead, the wound sprouted more of those tiny, translucent cilia, which immediately began to anchor me to the floorboards. I am now physically grafted to the house. I can feel the plumbing, which is now a network of veins, pumping hot, acidic sludge beneath my feet. The book is open to the 4th page, and a small, wet tongue is starting to poke out from the binding. The things in the fog have stopped tapping. They've started screaming. I can't hear them, but the vibrations are so violent they are shaking the teeth out of my gums. The vibrations from the screaming outside became so intense that the eye in the bay window actually shattered. It didn't break like glass. It popped like a massive, overfilled blister. A flood of vitreous humor, clear, salty, and thick, washed over me, pinning me against the wall muscle. The liquid was corrosive. Everywhere it touched my skin, it left behind a layer of translucent scales that felt like dried fish skin. I couldn't hear the chaos, but the taste in my mouth had turned into the flavor of scorched iron and burnt hair. That was the house's fear. It was the taste of a dying animal. The 4th page. The book was now fused to my palms. The wet tongue, poking out from the binding, began to lick my wrists. And with every stroke, my skin turned into the same lung paper material as the pages. I was being transcribed. My history, my DNA, my very essence was being turned into text for the book to store. I looked down at the 4th page. It was a shifting, kaleidoscopic mass of human hair. Thousands of strands, ranging from gray to blonde to black, were woven into the paper. As I watched, the hair began to grow. It coiled around my fingers, stitching them together. It wasn't just hair. It was a nervous system. The book was trying to move my arms for me. It wanted me to reach into the vertical slit of the front door and pull the board in. The house's organs. The house gave one final, violent lurch, and the remaining furniture, my heavy oak dining table and the chairs, melted entirely. They didn't turn into flesh, but into a hard, calcified substance that formed a cage around the central room. I was trapped in a rib cage of my own belongings. I looked toward the kitchen area. The walls there had developed large, pulsing bladders that filtered the gray fog from outside. The house was trying to breathe the exterior atmosphere, but it was poisonous. The bladders were turning black and necrotic, spraying a fine mist of rot into the air. Then, the floorboards beneath the book began to grow a throat. A literal, muscular tube rose up from the floor, and the book was slowly lowered into it. The house was swallowing the manual that created it. The fog breach. Suddenly, the front door slit was forced open. One of the things from the fog, the rib cage creatures, poked a long, needle-like finger inside. It wasn't looking for me. It was looking for the book. The finger was made of a material that looked like frozen smoke. Everywhere it touched the fleshy walls, the muscle withered and turned into gray ash. The house let out a vibration so powerful it shattered the remaining bones in my left foot. I felt the house's heart, which I realized was located beneath my bathtub, stop for a full 5 seconds. The creature's finger reached toward me, and I felt a coldness that wasn't just a temperature. It was an absence of life. It brushed against the scales on my arm, and I felt my memories of the color blue and the smell of rain simply vanish. It was deleting me. I realized the book wasn't a gift or a curse for me. I was just the petri dish. The creatures in the fog were the owners, and they were coming to collect the finished product. My house was a cocoon, and whatever was about to hatch was going to use my soul as the fuel for its first breath. I am currently paralyzed, half entombed in a rib cage made of my own table. The needle finger is inches from my forehead, and the taste in my mouth is now the flavor of a cold, empty grave. The book is halfway down the floor throat, but it's still flapping its pages, trying to tell me one last thing. The needle finger touched the center of my forehead, and the world didn't go dark. It went white. A searing, silent scream erupted behind my eyes as the creature began to download what was left of me. I felt my childhood, my name, and even the feeling of being warm evaporate, replaced by a hollow, ringing void. The house responded with a final, desperate act of self-preservation. The floor throat that had been swallowing the Liber Umbrarum cordis suddenly inverted. It didn't just spit the book out. It vomited a fountain of black, acidic bile and crushed bone. The book flew into the air, its pages splayed open, like the jaws of a predator, the 5th page. As the book hit the floor, it flipped to the final 5th page. There was no paper left. The last page was a hole, a literal window through the fabric of the room. Through it, I didn't see the fog or the creatures. I saw a library, a vast, infinite shelf of books, just like this one, each bound in different shades of human skin. I saw thousands of houses like mine, all pulsing and breathing in a void, being tended to by the rib-cage creatures, like farmers tending to a crop. I wasn't special. I wasn't even a victim. I was just a single cell in a cosmic plantation of suffering. The tongue in the book's binding lashed out one last time, wrapping around my throat. It wasn't trying to choke me. It was trying to pull my consciousness into the final page. My body, the scaled, flayed, and fused mess of meat I had become, stayed pinned to the rib cage of the house. But I began to slide toward that infinite library. The final transformation. The house gave one last, wet shudder. The walls began to liquefy, turning into a thick, red slurry that flooded the room. The eye in the bay window, now a shattered ruin, leaked the last of its fluid. As the structure collapsed, The creatures from the fog swarmed inside. They didn't use teeth. They used their needle fingers to stitch the collapsing meat into a compact, leather-bound shape. They were harvesting the house. They were turning my home and my physical body into a new copy of the Liber Umbrarum Cordis. I watched from the perspective of the 5th page as my own ribs were flattened and cured into the cover. I watched as my lungs were pressed and dried into the translucent pages. My memories were the ink. My hearing, the silence between the words. My soul was the silver latch, shaped like a rib, destined to draw the blood of the next collector who found the link on the deep web. The silence is absolute. The house is gone now. There is no more fog, no more creatures, and no more pain. There is only the shelf. I am sitting on a row between a book that tastes like a burning forest and a book that smells like a drowning child. I can't hear anything, not because I'm deaf, but because there is no air here to carry the sound. I am a closed volume of 160 pages. The only thing I can feel is the vibration of a hand reaching for my spine. Someone, somewhere in a cold apartment with an eviction notice and a desperate heart, has just clicked purchase. They are about to wake up at 3:13 a.m. They are about to feel a heavy, cold object sitting on their chest. And when they open me, they will see my name written in the veins of the first page. I am waiting for them to read the first line aloud. I am waiting for their silence to become my payment. This is the end of my history. If you see a listing for a book with a silver rib latch, do not click it, because I am very, very hungry for a new home. I took a dark web job to kidnap a person, and I kidnapped the wrong person. So, I'm posting this from a burner phone in a motel bathroom 3 towns away from where I live. I don't have much time before I have to smash this thing and move again. You guys know how these stories usually go. Some guy finds a link, gets greedy, and things go south. But this isn't some spooky campfire tale. This is real life. And I am currently looking at the door every 5 seconds, waiting for the handle to turn. I was desperate. That's the simplest way to put it. I'd lost my job, my rent was 3 months behind, and I was staring at an eviction notice. When you're that low, your morals don't just bend, they snap. I found a listing on a forum that wasn't even that deep, just a tiered encryption site. The post was simple. Logistics help needed, high risk, $50,000 payout. 50 grand. That's life-changing money when you're eating expired ramen. I messaged the handle, and within an hour, I had a set of instructions. The job. The target was a guy named Marcus Thorne. They sent me a grainy photo of a middle-aged man in a gray suit, an address in a quiet, upscale suburb, and a time frame. I was told he lived alone and that the client wanted him brought to an abandoned meat-packing plant on the edge of the industrial district. I spent 2 days sitting in a stolen Honda Civic, watching the house. It was a beautiful place. White siding, manicured lawn, the kind of house that smells like expensive candles and safety. I saw the target come home at 6 p.m. every night. On the third night, I made my move. I waited until 2 a.m. I'd bought a heavy-duty taser and some industrial zip ties from a hardware store. I felt like a monster, but the thought of that money kept my heart from beating out of my chest. I broke in through a basement window. The house was silent. Too silent. You know that feeling when the air feels heavy, like the house itself is holding its breath? I crept upstairs. My footsteps felt like gunshots on the hardwood. I reached the master bedroom, saw the shape of a body under the covers, and I didn't think. I lunged. I hit him with the taser, and the sound of his body seizing up, that wet, choking noise, is something I'll never forget. I threw a hood over his head, cinched his hands behind his back, and dragged him out to the car. The realization. I drove like a maniac to the drop-off point. My heart was a drum. The guy in the back was making these muffled, pathetic, whimpering sounds. I kept telling him to shut up, telling myself I was doing this for survival. I pulled into the warehouse. 2 guys were waiting there. They weren't mafia types. They looked like accountants, clean-cut, wearing blue surgical scrubs over their clothes. That's when the first spike of real, cold dread hit my stomach. Why the scrubs? "You got Thorne?" one of them asked. His voice was flat. No emotion. "Yeah," I panted, opening the trunk. "He's right here." They grabbed him by the armpits and hauled him out. They didn't even look at me. They sat him down under a single, buzzing fluorescent light and ripped the hood off. My stomach dropped through the floor. The man sitting there wasn't Marcus Thorne. He was younger, maybe mid-20s. He had thick glasses that were now cracked and hanging off one ear. He looked like a college student. He looked terrified. He looked familiar. "This isn't him," the guy in the scrubs said. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw his eyes. They were completely dead. "Who is this?" I got him from the house. The address you gave me," I stuttered. The kid started sobbing, a high-pitched, broken sound. I was just house-sitting," he wailed through the tape on his mouth. Please, I'm just the nephew. The horror starts. The man in the scrubs didn't look annoyed. He looked disappointed, like I'd brought him the wrong flavor of soda. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a scalpel, and before I could even scream, he did something to the kid's leg just to make him stop moving. It wasn't a movie cut. It was precise, methodical. We can't use this one for the primary order, the man said to his partner. But the organs are young. We'll harvest what we can here before the client arrives for the real thorn. He looked at me. And you? You led the trail right to us. You used a stolen car that has a GPS tracker on it. We checked while you were driving in. My blood turned to ice. What? No, The police are already at the house you broke into, he continued, stepping toward me. And because you were sloppy, the people who actually own this warehouse, the people we rent space from, are coming to clean up your mess. And they don't like witnesses. I realized then that I wasn't dealing with a simple kidnapping. I had stumbled into a professional organ harvesting ring that was currently being hunted by a rival cartel. I didn't wait. I turned and bolted for the door. As I ran, I heard the kid scream. Not a loud scream, but a wet, gurgling sound that stopped abruptly. I jumped into the car and floored it. As I was peeling out of the lot, 3 black SUVs pulled in, blocking the entrance. I saw men getting out with long-range rifles. They weren't aiming for the guys in scrubs. They were aiming for me. I managed to bash my way through a side fence, the sound of metal grinding on metal screaming in my ears. I drove until the engine started smoking, ditched the car in a creek, and ran. I'm currently in a room where the walls are paper thin. I can hear a car idling outside in the parking lot. It's been sitting there for 20 minutes. I took the wrong person. I killed an innocent kid for money I'm never going to see. And now, the people who lost their merchandise and the people who want to keep the warehouse quiet are both looking for me. And I think they just found the motel. I barely made it out of that motel. I didn't even use the door. I kicked the screen out of the back window and dropped into the wet grass just as I heard the front lock click open. I didn't look back, but I heard a muffled thwip sound. Suppressors. These weren't street thugs. These were professional cleaners. I ran through the woods for 2 miles until my lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. I finally collapsed behind a dumpster at a gas station and reached into my pocket. I still had the keys to that stolen Civic. And more importantly, a thick, plastic-wrapped envelope I'd snatched from the glove box right before I ditched the car in the creek. I ripped it open with my teeth. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the contents into the puddle at my feet. Inside were three things: a burner phone that was already vibrating, a stack of high-quality surveillance photos of a high-ranking police captain named Miller, and a ledger. I'm not a genius, but it didn't take long to realize why I was a dead man walking. The ledger wasn't just a list of names. It was a payroll. It showed exactly how much the local syndicate was paying the organized crime division of the city police to look the other way. I hadn't just botched a kidnapping. I had stolen the syndicate's insurance policy against the cops. The call, the burner phone in the envelope, buzzed again. I answered it. I didn't say a word. "You have 5 minutes to tell us where you are, or we start visiting the addresses listed on your DMV record," a voice said. It was deep, calm, and terrifyingly polite. "The boy you took, he was a mistake, yes. But the car you chose? That was a very, very poor decision. I don't have the car anymore," I whispered, my voice cracking. "We know. We found it in the creek. But the envelope is missing. That envelope belongs to the family. If the precinct gets a hold of those ledger pages, a lot of people go to prison. If we get them back, maybe you just get a quick exit instead of a slow one." They knew who I was. They had my records. My stomach turned. My sister lived 2 towns over. My mother was in a nursing home. I realized then that the mafia and the police weren't 2 separate problems. They were 2 heads of the same snake. The precinct, I knew I couldn't go to the police. If I walked into a station, Captain Miller, the guy in the photos, would probably have me disappear before I even finished my statement. But I also knew the syndicate wouldn't stop until I was erased. I spent the next 4 hours hitching rides and staying off the main roads. I ended up back in the city, hiding in a 24-hour laundromat. I needed leverage. I took photos of every page of that ledger with my own phone and uploaded them to a cloud drive. Then I did something incredibly stupid. I called the one person I thought might be clean, a rookie detective named Sarah Vance. I'd seen her name in the news for busting a small-time ring a few months back. "I have the Miller ledger," I told her when she picked up. There was a long silence on the other end. "Who is this?" "The guy everyone is looking for. Meet me at the old shipyard in 30 minutes. Come alone. If I see a squad car or a black SUV, the ledger goes live on every social media platform I can find." The shipyard. The shipyard was a graveyard of rusted shipping containers and salt air. It was freezing. I hid in the shadows of a crane, clutching the envelope. A single car pulled up. A beat-up sedan. Detective Vance got out. She looked tired, her hand hovering near her holster. "Show me," she said, her voice echoing in the empty lot. I stepped out, keeping the envelope visible. "It's all here. The bribes, the dates, the names of the officers on the payroll. Miller is at the top of the list." She walked toward me, her face unreadable. "You have no idea what you've stepped into. This isn't just about a kidnapping. The kid you took, he wasn't just the nephew. He was the son of the district attorney. The syndicate wanted him to keep the DA from signing the indictments. You killed the one piece of leverage everyone was fighting over." My heart stopped. The kid in the scrubs. He was the DA's son? "I didn't know," I choked out. "I thought he was just some guy." "It doesn't matter what you thought," Vance said. She was only 10 feet away now. "The problem is, the DA thinks the police did it. The police think the syndicate did it. And the syndicate knows you did it." Suddenly, the red dot of a laser sight appeared on Vance's chest. "Get down!" I yelled. A shot rang out, echoing like a thunderclap against the metal containers. Vance spun and fell. But the shot didn't come from a sniper. It came from the darkness behind her. Out of the shadows stepped Captain Miller. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a tactical vest, holding a suppressed rifle. Behind him were 4 men in suits, the mafia accountants from the warehouse. "You did a good job finding him, Sarah," Miller said, looking down at the detective bleeding on the pavement. "A shame you had to be the hero." He looked at me, a cruel smirk on his face. "Give me the ledger, kid, and maybe I'll let you run for another 10 minutes before I let these gentlemen have their turn with you." I realized then that the clean detective had been the bait. Everyone was in on it. The police, the mob, the whole city was a machine. And I was just the grit in the gears that was about to be crushed. I'm writing this while hiding inside a rusted-out boiler. I can hear Miller and the syndicate guys walking around outside, clinking their guns against the metal. They're laughing. They know I'm trapped. I still have the ledger. And I just realized there's a second envelope tucked into the back of the folder. It's marked Witness Protection, Unauthorized. I'm squeezed into this rusted boiler, and the smell is making me gag. It's a mix of old grease, salt, and the metallic tang of blood from where I scraped my arm sliding in here. Outside, the footsteps are slow, methodical. They aren't rushing because they know there's only one way out of this section of the shipyard. "Come on, kid," Miller's voice boomed, sounding way too casual. "You're making this a lot more painful than it needs to be. Just hand over the papers, and we can tell the DA it was a tragic accident involving a stray bullet. You might even walk away." I knew that was a lie. If I stepped out, They'd put a bullet in my head before I could even blink. I reached into the back of the folder and pulled out that second envelope marked Witness Protection, Unauthorized. My fingers were slick with sweat as I fumbled it open. The real horror inside weren't just more names. There were Polaroids. I felt my stomach lurch into my throat. They weren't photos of criminals or politicians. They were photos of children, dozens of them. They were all in the same clinical setting I'd seen earlier. Those blue surgical scrubs, the cold fluorescent lights. Underneath the photos were shipping manifestos. It wasn't just organs. They were selling the whole human being, piece by piece, or as long-term assets, to people with enough money to make a person disappear forever. The dates went back 10 years. But the most disturbing part? The witness protection label wasn't a mistake. Miller and his crew weren't just taking random people. They were taking people who went to the police for help. People who entered witness protection were being gold off to the very cartels they were testifying against. The police weren't protecting them. They were delivering the merchandise directly to the syndicate's butcher shop. I saw a photo of a woman I recognized from a cold case file I'd seen on the news years ago. She'd been a witness to a mob hit. The police said she vanished while under their watch. No. She was sold. The betrayal. Suddenly, the side of the boiler echoed with a deafening clang. Someone had kicked it. "I hear your breathing, you little rat," one of the syndicate guys hissed. I could see the tip of a crowbar prying at the rusted seam of the metal. I looked at the burner phone. 1 bar of service. I had 1 shot. I didn't call 911. That would just bring more of Miller's friends. I dialed the only number I'd seen in the unauthorized files that had a handwritten note next to it. Internal Affairs. Do not contact. A man answered on the second ring. "This is Miller's office. Who is this?" My heart stopped. The IA contact number was routed directly to Miller's desk. There was no clean side. The entire system was looped. "Wrong number," I whispered, and hung up. The crowbar winched the metal plate back with a screeching groan. Light flooded into my hiding spot. I saw a pair of polished black dress shoes. Miller. "Found you." He smiled. He reached in, grabbed me by my hair, and hauled me out of the boiler. My knees hit the concrete hard. The syndicate guys stood around us, their faces shadowed by the moonlight. One of them was holding a bone saw. Not a gun. A saw. "The ledger," Miller demanded, holding out his hand. "It's gone," I spat. "I mailed it. It's on its way to the press." Miller didn't even flinch. He just nodded to the guy with the saw. "Then I guess we start with the hands. Hard to mail things without fingers, right?" The escape. The guy with the saw stepped forward. The blade was spinning. A high-pitched, electric whine that set my teeth on edge. He grabbed my left arm, pinning it to a wooden crate. I started screaming, kicking wildly, but they were too heavy. Just as the blade touched my skin, a massive explosion rocked the shipyard. A shipping container 20 yards away erupted in a ball of orange fire. The shockwave knocked everyone to the ground. The guy with the saw fell onto his own tool, and the sound he made, it wasn't human. It was a wet, mechanical grinding noise, followed by a shriek that cut through the fire's roar. I didn't stay to watch. A group of men in tactical gear, not police, not syndicate, started swarming from the docks. They were wearing masks with a white wolf symbol. "The Venevsky cartel," Miller cursed, scrambling for his rifle. "They're here for the boy." The Venevskys were the rivals the syndicate had been hiding from. They weren't there to save me. They were there to kill everyone and take the ledger for themselves. The shipyard turned into a war zone. Bullets were ricocheting off the containers like angry hornets. I grabbed the folder, crawled under a heavy industrial trailer, and watched as Miller's accountants were ripped apart by submachine gun fire. In the chaos, I saw Miller backing away toward his car, but he didn't see the Venevsky member coming up behind him with a heavy chain. I didn't wait to see the rest. I crawled through the mud and the oil, heading toward the dark water of the harbor. I had to swim. It was the only way. I'm currently shivering in a stolen fishing boat, drifting out into the bay. My arm is bleeding where the saw grazed me, and the ledger is soaked, but readable. I realized something while I was watching Miller get dragged into the dark. The DA's son, the kid I kidnapped, isn't dead. I saw a note in the unauthorized file. They didn't kill him at the warehouse. They moved him to a processing center underneath a local funeral home. I have to go back. Not because I'm a hero, but because he's the only witness who can prove I was just a pawn. If he dies, I'm the only one the world will ever blame for all of this. I can see the lights of the funeral home from the shore. It's 4 a.m. I have 2 hours before the sun comes up, and every cop in the state starts hunting me again. I'm currently crouched behind a row of headstones in the cemetery adjacent to the Eternal Rest funeral home. The rain is coming down in sheets now, turning the dirt into a thick, sucking mud that smells like sulfur and rot. My arm is throbbing where that saw nipped me, and I've tied a greasy rag around it to stop the leaking. Looking at this place, you'd think it was just another somber business. But after seeing those manifestos, I know what's really under the floorboards. The processing center. It's the perfect cover. Nobody questions why large wooden boxes are being moved in and out, at 4 a.m. Nobody questions the smell of chemicals or the sound of heavy machinery. I found a cellar door near the back, partially hidden by overgrown ivy. It was locked with a heavy electronic keypad, but the frame was rotted. I used a crowbar I found in the fishing boat to wrench the wood until the bolt popped. The sound of the wood splintering felt like a gunshot in the quiet night. The processing center. I stepped inside, and the temperature dropped instantly. It wasn't just cold, it was clinical. The air tasted like bleach, and something sweet, like rotting fruit covered in perfume. I followed a narrow, concrete hallway lined with steel doors. There were no names on the doors, just numbers. As I moved deeper, I started hearing it. A rhythmic, wet, thudding sound. Thump. Squish. Thump. Squish. I peered through a small, reinforced glass window on door 04. My knees almost gave out. There were 2 men in those same blue scrubs. They had a body on a stainless steel table. It wasn't the kid. It was a man, maybe 60. And they were working on him while he was clearly still breathing. He was intubated, his eyes wide and glazed, staring at the ceiling as they systematically removed assets. They weren't using anesthesia. They were using some kind of paralytic. He could feel everything, but he couldn't even blink. I realized then that witness protection wasn't just a betrayal. It was a farm. These people were being kept alive as long as possible to keep the merchandise fresh. The boy. I kept moving, my stomach doing somersaults, until I reached the end of the hall. Door 12. I looked through the glass and saw him, the DA's son. He was strapped to a chair, his face a mask of bruises. They hadn't started on him yet, but there was a tray of surgical instruments laid out next to him. I fumbled with the handle. Locked. I didn't have time to be quiet. I took the crowbar and smashed the glass. The alarm didn't go off. They didn't want the police coming here any more than I did. But a red light started pulsing silently in the hallway. I scrambled inside and started ripping the tape off his mouth. "Don't scream," I hissed. "I'm the guy who took you. I know. I'm a piece of garbage, but I'm the only chance you have of getting out of here." The kid looked at me with pure, unadulterated terror. He tried to pull away, his muffled groans sounding like a wounded animal. "They're going to kill us both if we don't move," I said, slicing through his zip ties with a scalpel from the tray. The second his hands were free, he didn't hit me. He just grabbed my shirt and started shaking. They took my eyes," he whispered, his voice cracking. I froze. I looked closer. His eyelids were stitched shut, with heavy, black, surgical thread. They hadn't taken them yet. They'd just prepped him so he couldn't identify anyone if something went wrong. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it made me want to lay down and die. The trap. "We have to go. Now," I said, hauling him to his feet. We stumbled back into the hallway, but the exit was already blocked. Standing there, dripping wet and holding a heavy-gauge shotgun, was the man from the warehouse, the one who'd cut the kid's leg earlier. He wasn't wearing his mask anymore. He looked like a normal, middle-aged dad. That made it 10 times worse. "You really are a persistent little pest," he said, leveling the barrels at my chest. "Do you have any idea how much paperwork you've caused me tonight? We've had to move 3 units ahead of schedule because of your little stunt at the shipyard." "I have the ledger," I said, holding the folder up. "And the photos. If you pull that trigger, my phone sends the cloud link to every major news outlet in the country. It's on a dead man's switch." The man laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "Kid, look around you. Who do you think owns the news outlets? Who do you think funds the servers your cloud runs on? We aren't the mafia. We aren't the police. We're the people who own the people you're afraid of." He stepped forward, the red light of the hallway reflecting in his dead eyes. "The Venevskys, Miller, they're just contractors. We're the board of directors. And you just tried to rob the company store." Suddenly, the floor beneath us vibrated. A heavy mechanical hum started coming from the walls. "That's the incinerator warming up," the man said. "We don't leave evidence. Not anymore." I looked at the kid, his eyes stitched shut, clutching my arm. I looked at the man with the shotgun. I realized there was no out. There was only through. I reached into my pocket and grabbed the flare gun I'd taken from the fishing boat. I didn't aim for the man. I aimed for the row of oxygen tanks lined up against the wall behind him. "Hope you like the heat," I whispered. I pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. I'm currently dragged into a crawl space beneath the floorboards of the funeral home. The building above me is an inferno. I can hear people screaming, not just the bad guys, but the people in the rooms. The units. I have the kid. We're trapped in a space barely 3 feet high, and the floor above us is starting to sag from the heat. I can hear sirens in the distance, but I don't know if they're coming to save us or finish the job. And then I heard it. A voice from the other side of the crawl space wall. A soft, scratching sound. "Is someone there? Please. They told me I was next." The heat above us is becoming unbearable. Melted wax from the funeral home's storage is actually dripping through the floorboards, sizzling like grease on the concrete. I'm lying on my stomach in the dirt. The DA's son huddled against my back, his breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. "Is someone there?" The voice from behind the wall came again. It was weak, airy, like someone speaking through a throat full of sand. I crawled toward the sound, pushing aside a pile of old, discarded wooden slats. I found a small ventilation grate. I peered through, and my heart didn't just drop. It stopped. On the other side wasn't just another room. It was a holding pen. There were 3 people in there, but they weren't in chairs. They were hanging from meat hooks by their waistbands, their skin a sickly, translucent gray from being drained of just enough blood to keep them docile. "I can't get to you," I yelled over the roar of the fire. "The whole place is coming down." "Please," the voice whispered. "Just tell my daughter I didn't run away. Tell her the police lied." I recognized the name he gave. He was a witness from a high-profile case 3 years ago. The board of directors had been keeping him as a slow-drip donor for years. I realized then that death in the fire was a mercy for them. I turned away, tears stinging my eyes, not from the smoke, but from the pure, concentrated evil of this place. The last stand. I grabbed the kid's hand and started digging. The crawl space ended at a small, reinforced, concrete foundation. We were boxed in. Above us, the floorboards groaned and gave way. A heavy mahogany casket crashed through the ceiling, slamming down just inches from my legs. It shattered, spilling out a body that wasn't a client. It was a woman in those same blue scrubs, her throat cut. Miller's people and the Venevskys must have been executing each other, even as the building burned. "We have to climb through the hole," I yelled to the kid. I hauled him up into the burning ruins of the funeral home's chapel. The air was thick with the smell of burning velvet and embalming fluid. Through the smoke, I saw a figure standing by the front doors. It was Captain Miller. He was scorched, half his face a map of raw, red burns from the shipyard explosion, his uniform tattered. He didn't have his rifle anymore, just a service pistol. He looked less like a man, and more like a demon emerging from the vents of hell. "You ruined everything," he croaked, leveling the gun at me. "The money, the retirement, the protection, all of it burned because you couldn't just deliver one man to a warehouse." "It was never about the money, Miller," I screamed, shielding the kid. "You were selling people. You were selling kids." "I was balancing the books," he roared, his finger tightening on the trigger. A shot rang out, but Miller's head didn't snap back. Instead, he looked down at his chest. A small, red hole had appeared in the center of his heart. He looked confused, then toppled backward into the wall of flames. Standing in the doorway, framed by the blue and red lights of 100 police cruisers, was Detective Sarah Vance. She was pale, clutching her side where she'd been shot earlier, her service weapon still smoking. Behind her weren't the contractors. It was the state police and the FBI. The aftermath. They rushed in and tackled me to the ground. I didn't fight. I just held on to that ledger like it was my own soul. I watched as they carried the DA's son out. He was screaming for me, not because he liked me, but because I was the only person who had spoken to him like a human being in that nightmare. They took me to an interrogation room in a different city, one where the board supposedly had no reach. I gave them everything: the ledger, the photos, the location of the creek where the car was, the names I saw on the shipping manifestos. But here's the thing that's kept me awake for the last 48 hours in this holding cell. Vance came to see me this morning. She looked like a ghost. She sat across from me and pushed a single piece of paper across the table. It was a crime scene report from the funeral home ruins. "We found the basement," she said, her voice shaking. "We found the holding pens, but there were only 2 bodies in the hooks, not 3. And the man you talked to through the vent? The one who gave you his daughter's name?" "Yeah?" I asked, my heart hammering. "He died in 2022. We found his dental records in a different part of the building. He's been dead for years." I felt the room spin. Then who was I talking to? Who told me to tell his daughter the truth? Vance leaned in closer. The daughter. She's the one who signed the work order for the funeral home's security system 6 months ago. She's part of the board. They weren't keeping him alive. They were using his voice, recorded, synthesized, to lure in anyone who got too close to the vents. It was a trap, and you fell for it. She stood up to leave. "The FBI is moving you tonight, but you should know, the ledger you gave us, the names are changing. Every time we open the digital file, the names of the officers are being replaced with names of people who died decades ago. Someone is scrubbing the system from the inside." The final warning. I'm sitting here now, waiting for the transport van. I can see the driver through the small reinforced window in the door. He's wearing a blue uniform, but under his collar, I can see a flash of light blue fabric. Surgical scrubs. The board doesn't lose. They just relocate. They've been at this for a long time, and they have all the time in the world to wait for a logistics error like me to be corrected. If you're reading this, don't look for the dark web jobs. Don't look for the easy money. Because once you see how the machine is fed, the machine makes sure you become the next meal. I can hear the key turning in the cell door now. The driver isn't saying a word. He's just holding a pair of heavy-duty zip ties and a black hood. I think I'm about to become a unit.